My name is Arthur Bennett. I'm 91 years old, and there is one question my wife asked me almost 40 years ago that still follows me everywhere. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was just an ordinary Tuesday evening. But that question changed the way I see my entire life. The strange thing is, when she asked it, I laughed. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought I already knew the answer. But the truth? It took me almost 40 years to realize I was wrong. Completely wrong. My wife, Margaret, and I were married for 43 years. We had a small house, 2 children, a dog that barked at every passing car. From the outside, our life looked perfectly normal. In fact, people used to say we were lucky, and maybe we were. But there is something I understand now that I didn't understand back then. You can live beside someone for decades and still never truly see them. Back then, I worked long hours. I owned a small auto repair shop. Nothing fancy. Just a garage with 3 lifts and a radio that never seemed to play anything except old country songs. Most mornings I left before the sun came up, and most evenings I came home long after dinner. Margaret never complained, not once. She always greeted me the same way, standing in the kitchen, a soft smile. Long day, I'd nod, she'd pour me coffee, and I'd sit at the table while she talked about her day, or at least she tried to, because most of the time I wasn't really listening, not intentionally, just distracted, thinking about work, bills, customers, everything except the person sitting across from me. One evening in 1984, we were sitting on the couch. The kids had already gone to bed. The house was quiet. Margaret was reading a book. I was flipping through television channels. Back then, we only had about 6 channels, and somehow none of them had anything worth watching. She closed her book and looked at me. "Arthur," she said, "can I ask you something?" I didn't even look away from the TV. "Sure." She paused. Then she asked a question so simple that at the time I almost laughed. She said, "Are you actually happy?" I remember chuckling. I turned my head and said, "Of course I'm happy." I gestured around the room. "We have a house. We have healthy kids. I have a good business. What's not to be happy about?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She just watched me for a moment. Then she said something very quietly. "You always talk about everything around you." She tapped the coffee table gently. "The house, the job, the bills." Then she looked at me again. "But you never talk about you." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was overthinking things. I thought happiness was simple. You work hard. You provide for your family. You keep everything running. That's what being a good man meant where I grew up. You didn't sit around talking about feelings. You just handled your responsibilities. And I was very good at handling responsibilities. But what I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, I had stopped living my life. I was managing it, maintaining it, protecting it, but I wasn't actually living it. And the worst part, I didn't even notice. Margaret asked me that question again a few months later. We were taking a walk after dinner. It was early autumn. Leaves were falling along the sidewalk. She said, "Arthur, I'm serious about that question. Are you actually happy?" I shrugged. "I guess so." She nodded slowly. Then she said something I didn't think much about at the time, but now it haunts me. She said, "You move through life like you're always somewhere else." For a long time, I didn't understand what Margaret meant. You move through life like you're always somewhere else. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself she was just being thoughtful. Margaret had always been that way. She noticed things, small things, the way people's voices changed when they were tired, the way someone smiled differently when they were pretending everything was fine. She noticed things most of us ignored, and I suppose that's why she noticed something about me long before I did. Years went by. Our children grew up. Our son Daniel moved 3 states away for work. Our daughter Emily started a family of her own. The house slowly became quieter. And like many couples, Margaret and I found ourselves sitting in rooms that once felt full, now filled with silence. But the silence didn't bother me. In fact, I welcomed it. After decades of work and responsibility, quiet felt like rest. But Margaret experienced that quiet differently. She once told me something I didn't understand until many years later. She said, "Silence can be peaceful, or it can be lonely." At the time, I nodded politely, but I didn't really hear her. Most evenings followed the same routine. Margaret cooked dinner. We ate together. I watched the news. She read a book. Sometimes she would tell me stories about neighbors, or something she had read, or something she had been thinking about. And most of the time, I answered with one word, yeah, or or maybe. I wasn't trying to be distant. I just thought that was normal. After all, we had been married for decades. What more needed to be said? Looking back now, I realized something painful. Margaret was still trying to know me, even after all those years, and I had stopped trying to know her, not because I didn't love her, but because I assumed I already did. That assumption is more dangerous than people realize. There is one evening I remember very clearly. It was late winter. Snow was falling outside. Margaret had made tea for both of us. We were sitting in the living room. She looked at me and said, "Arthur, do you ever think about what makes life meaningful?" I laughed. Meaningful? Margaret, I fix transmissions for a living. I don't think about meaning. I think about carburetors. She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile she used to have. It was softer, almost tired. Then she said something that I didn't fully understand until many years later. She said, "You know what I think happiness is?" I shrugged. "What?" She looked toward the window for a moment. Then she said, "Being awake inside your own life." At the time, I didn't know what she meant. I thought happiness was comfort, security, a paid mortgage, a stable life. But Margaret was talking about something completely different. She was talking about presence, about noticing moments while they are happening, about being emotionally awake. And the truth is, I had been asleep for a very long time. The strange thing about autopilot is that it feels safe. You wake up, you go to work, you solve problems, you take care of responsibilities. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into years, and before you realize it, decades have passed. I thought I was living responsibly, but in reality, I was drifting through life without ever slowing down enough to experience it. Margaret noticed this long before I did. One night she asked me another question, a question that at the time seemed almost silly. She said, "Arthur, when was the last time something made you feel truly alive?" I thought about it. I couldn't answer, not because nothing had happened, but because I hadn't been paying attention. And that was the first moment. The very first moment when I felt a small crack in the story I had been telling myself about my life, I started to realize something uncomfortable. I had built a good life, but I wasn't actually inside it. I was standing next to it, watching it happen, managing it, protecting it, but not experiencing it. And the person who noticed that first was my wife. The tragedy of wisdom is this: the people who see us most clearly as often see things about us we are not ready to face. Margaret saw something about me that I was still blind to. She saw that I had mistaken responsibility for fulfillment and routine for happiness. One evening, about a year after that first question, she asked me something again, but this time her voice sounded different, softer, more serious. She said, "Arthur, promise me something." I looked up. "What?" She said, "Promise me that one day you'll actually ask yourself that question." I frowned. "What question?" She looked straight at me. "The one I asked you." Then she repeated it slowly. "Are you actually happy?" I said yes again, just like before. But something about the way she looked at me that evening stayed with me. Not anger, not disappointment, just a quiet curiosity, like she was wondering whether one day I might finally notice something she had already seen. And the strange thing is, she was right, but I didn't realize it until many years later, much too late. Years passed. Life kept moving forward the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. Margaret and I grew older. My hair turned gray. My hands became slower. And the repair shop that once kept me busy every waking hour began to feel different. Customers I had known for decades started bringing their sons instead of their cars. Some of the old regulars stopped coming altogether. One day you see someone every week, and the next time you realize you haven't seen them in years. That's when you understand how quietly time moves. Then one afternoon, Margaret told me something that made my heart stop for a moment. She said she needed to see a doctor. At first it seemed routine, just a checkup, nothing serious. At least that's what we both told ourselves. But after a few weeks, things changed. Tests, appointments, more waiting, more silence. And then one morning the doctor used a word that instantly makes every room feel colder: cancer. In moments like that, something strange happens. Time slows down, but also speeds up. Suddenly, all the ordinary things that once felt predictable become fragile. Every conversation starts to feel more important. Every quiet evening feels heavier. And every moment you once ignored begins to look different. Margaret handled everything with a calmness that amazed me. She still made tea, still watered the plants, still smiled when our grandchildren visited. But sometimes I would catch her looking out the window in a way that made my chest tighten, like she was thinking about something far away. One evening we were sitting together in the living room, the same couch where she had asked me that question decades earlier. The house was quiet again, just like that night in 1984. Margaret reached for my hand. Her hands were thinner now, more fragile. She squeezed gently and looked at me. "Arthur," she said, "do you remember that question I asked you a long time ago?" I nodded. Of course I remembered. I had thought about it many times, but never deeply enough. She smiled softly. "Are you actually happy?" This time I didn't laugh. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an easy answer, because in that moment I realized something that shook me more than anything else ever had. For 40 years, I had been chasing stability, responsibility, routine, but I had never stopped long enough to ask myself the question Margaret had asked me. I had never stopped long enough to truly experience the life we built together. I looked at her and said something I had never admitted before. I don't know. Margaret nodded, not surprised, almost as if she had been waiting for that answer for a very long time. Then she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "You were always taking care of life, Arthur, but you forgot to live inside it." Those words stayed with me, and they changed something inside me. In the weeks that followed, I started doing something I had not done in decades. I slowed down. We sat outside in the mornings, watched the sunlight reach the trees, talked about old memories, talked about nothing at all. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt awake inside my own life. Margaret passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, peacefully, holding my hand. The house became very still after that, quieter than it had ever been before. For weeks I kept expecting to hear her footsteps in the kitchen, or the sound of a book closing in the living room. But silence filled every room. Now I'm 91 years old, and I spend a lot of evenings sitting in the same place where Margaret once asked me that simple question. Sometimes I think about how strange it is that the most important lessons in life are often the simplest ones, not complicated philosophies, not grand achievements, just simple questions, questions that force you to look at your life honestly. So tonight I want to ask you the same thing Margaret asked me. Not because I have the answer, but because I know what happens if you never ask it. Are you actually happy? Not comfortable, not successful, not busy, happy. Because one day you will look around the room you are sitting in right now and realize how many moments quietly passed while you were somewhere else. And when that day comes, I hope you can answer that question more easily than I could.